Watercolor painters, would you like a method for being able to lift out a thin line? Well, look what I've come up with. Watercolor painting is so tricky. It has so many things that we can do, but it has a lot of frustrations too. And sometimes we might be in the middle of a painting and wish that we just had a method for doing something that we need at that particular moment, but can't quite pull that method out of our little reservoir of methods yet. Here's one that I've come up with for lifting out a thin line. So let's begin with what we need here. So we need tissue. It can be just plain Kleenex tissue. Now for this one, you don't want to use paper towel that has patterns in it. Paper towel doesn't work as well as the tissue because it's not as thin. The surface is not as fine. So a Kleenex tissue or something like that it works better for me on this one. Okay, so that's what you need. You need a credit card or some sort of plastic card. Works really good. It works good with a palette knife too, but I think the credit card gives me more flexibility. You can experiment with that. So this is how it goes. Now, first of all, I'm just going to wet the paper like we normally do. If we're starting a watercolor painting, wet and wet, this method does work wet on dry, but I want to do the wet on wet so I can show you the various ramifications. I'm just going to do a single color. The color's not important here. It's the technique that's important, and so I'll just lay in some cobalt blue so that you can see where I'm going here. Now, as we know, when you lay a watercolor wash in, the first thing that happens is the water begins to evaporate. This method has different effects at different stages of evaporation. So let's look at what can happen here. Now, if you just pull the tissue over the credit card like this, bend back the corners, and while it's very wet, you see, you can get sort of a thick line. As it gets drier, as more and more of the water evaporates, you need to pull not quite so much of that tissue in to get the really, really thin line. Then, you see, you can get the thinner line. And as the water continues to evaporate, you see, you can continue to pull a thin line. And that capability can be available to you for a long time, or a relatively long time, until the point that the paper is almost dry. Now, one of the advantages, especially when you're working with a regular surface paper, not a smooth surface paper, but a cold press paper, that some of those areas will fill back in, and that makes for a nice kind of broken line so that you don't have it, so that it's not too harsh. So for things in nature, that might be a very good thing. If you wait until most of the water has evaporated and you do the line again, that's not likely to happen. So the crispness of the line will be determined by when you do the lift out within the range of the dampness. So you see the water's continuing to evaporate here, and I'm still able to lift out. In the places at the bottom here where it's still wet, you can see we get some of that color running back in, which we might want for nature things. But then if we wanted the crisper line, you see I continue to move the tissue along the credit card. I go back up here. All right, so you see now that's a very subtle line. It's almost dry up there. The water's almost gone. So when you work with this for a while, you'll get a real sensibility about when, there we go, there's the one where it will not run back. That's where the gloss completely disappears, but it still has that dampness to it. So if you play with this for a while and experiment, you will find the different times within the evaporation of the water when you can get those different qualities of line. So I think you'll have fun working with this. Give it a try and see what you think. And there's your quick tip.